It was a story that no one could have predicted. A tale of love, loss, betrayal, and the shocking twists of fate. A millionaire businessman, once the picture of success, had it all: wealth, power, and a beautiful wife who stood by his side through thick and thin. But when tragedy struck, everything changed. What happened when his wife became seriously ill, and the man who vowed to love her forever abandoned her in her most vulnerable moment? Months later, he would find himself staring into the face of a reality he never saw coming. This is a story of human nature, heartache, and an unexpected twist that would leave him and you stunned. It began in the lap of luxury. Jake Thompson, a successful entrepreneur, was known for his sharp mind and even sharper business acumen. He was the kind of man people envied, admired, and dreamed of becoming. His wife, Emily, was the woman by his side, stunning, graceful, and kind. Together, they seemed to have it all. But like any great story, theirs took an unexpected turn. Emily had always been the strong one in their relationship. She had supported Jake through every challenge, every new venture, and every success. Their love was built on years of mutual respect and deep connection. But then, out of nowhere, Emily's health began to deteriorate. What started as a few missed days of work soon escalated into something far worse. She was diagnosed with a debilitating illness, one that would change the course of her life forever. A condition that left her unable to walk, her energy drained, and her body failing her day by day. It was every couple's nightmare, but Jake swore he would be there for her, just like he always had been. But soon, something started to shift. As Emily's condition worsened, Jake began to distance himself. The late nights at the office turned into even later nights, and his presence at home grew scarce. He told himself it was because he needed to work harder to secure their future. After all, he was a businessman, and Emily had always loved the life he was building for them. But in the back of his mind, doubts crept in. Could he still love her if she was no longer the woman she used to be? Could he be with someone who could no longer offer him the life he'd imagined? In the darkest days of her illness, Jake made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He left. He walked away, telling himself it was for the best, that she needed space to heal, and that he needed to focus on his business. It was the ultimate betrayal. Emily was devastated, left alone in a world she didn't recognize, grappling with her physical limitations and the deep emotional pain of abandonment. Jake thought he had moved on. He threw himself into his work, convinced that with enough success, everything would be okay. But months passed, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Despite the new luxury cars, new homes, and new projects he threw himself into, he couldn't ignore the gnawing emptiness that began to consume him. In a moment of quiet desperation, Jake thought back to Emily, the woman he had once loved so deeply. But little did Jake know, Emily wasn't the woman she used to be either. She had rebuilt herself, slowly but surely, finding strength in her own abilities and in people who cared for her. With each passing day, she grew stronger. Emotionally, mentally, and physically. Her journey was not just about recovery from illness. It was about reclaiming her life and her power. She started new projects, became involved in causes that were close to her heart, and surrounded herself with people who valued her for who she was, not for her appearance or her past. Then came the day when Jake received a call that would change everything. He had no idea what he was about to hear, but as the phone rang, a chill ran down his spine. Emily was no longer the fragile, dependent woman he had left behind. She had become an even stronger, more confident person than he could have ever imagined. But that was only the beginning. Months after his abandonment, Jake found himself at a crossroads. His business was thriving, but something felt deeply wrong. In the quiet moments, he thought about Emily, and not in the way he once did. He regretted what he had done. But could he undo the damage? Was it possible to fix the wreckage of their past? And more importantly, did Emily even want him back? But what happened next would leave him, and you, in utter disbelief. The truth behind Emily's transformation, the decisions she made, and the shocking revelation that would make Jake question everything he thought he knew was about to unfold. Stay tuned as we uncover what happens when the millionaire who abandoned his wife is left stunned by the consequences of his actions. As the months went by, Jake found himself trapped in a whirlwind of his own making. His once tight grip on everything that mattered, his business, his reputation, his wealth, began to slip. What should have been a time of celebration, with his company growing and his financial empire expanding, started to feel hollow. Sure, the parties were fun, the expensive vacations thrilling, and the recognition from his peers was gratifying. But at night, when the noise of the world quieted down, a deep loneliness gnawed at him. There was no one to share it with, no one to turn to. He often found himself thinking about Emily, the woman he had loved, the woman he had discarded when things got hard. But it wasn't just guilt that pulled at him. He couldn't help but wonder if she was doing better without him. In fact, he feared she was doing more than just surviving. She was thriving. What had happened to her in the months since he left? He thought he knew her inside and out, but now he was unsure of everything. The memory of her once fragile health contrasted so sharply with the glimpses he'd heard from mutual acquaintances about how she was becoming more independent, more powerful, even a bit of a local hero. She was no longer the woman he left behind. She was something, or someone, else. Jake's obsession with Emily grew quietly, behind closed doors. He started looking into her life, discreetly following her social media updates, seeing photos of her smiling, traveling, meeting new people. It wasn't just the physical transformation that threw him off, but the mental and emotional one as well. Emily wasn't just getting better. She was building a life without him, a life he had no part in. And as the months passed, Jake started hearing rumors. Emily wasn't just healing. She had started speaking at events about overcoming adversity, even becoming an advocate for people with disabilities. She had found a new purpose, and it wasn't tied to Jake in any way. The weight of what he had done to her began to settle in. He had abandoned her at her lowest point, and she had proven him wrong. She wasn't dependent or weak. She had found strength in the hardest of circumstances. As Jake thought about reaching out to her, guilt started to claw at him. Could he still ask for forgiveness? Was there any chance Emily would even want him back? Then came the day when his entire world changed. Jake received a phone call. It wasn't from Emily, but from someone else entirely. It was from a lawyer. Emily had contacted them, and Jake's heart sank as he listened to the message. His stomach twisted as he realized that Emily wasn't just moving on with her life. She was doing something far more profound. She was suing him. The reason? Emily was seeking a divorce, and it wasn't just any divorce. She had also filed for financial compensation for the abandonment, for the emotional distress, for the years of support she had given him during their marriage that he had so easily cast aside. Jake's mind reeled as he absorbed the words. This was more than just a legal matter. This was a turning point. The woman he had discarded had found a way to take control of her life, and now she was taking action. As the shock of the lawsuits settled in, Jake's mind raced. How could he fix this? The more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he had underestimated her. Emily wasn't just a woman he had wronged. She was a force to be reckoned with. And she was no longer that same woman who needed his protection, his money, or his approval. She had become her own person. Strong, independent, and unstoppable. Meanwhile, Emily's life had taken an unexpected but beautiful turn. As she began to gain more independence, she dove into new passions. The pain from her illness and the heartbreak from Jake's departure were still there, but they no longer defined her. She began advocating for others, creating a community of people who had gone through similar struggles, and using her voice to inspire others facing life's darkest moments. The public began to take notice. The woman who once seemed like the victim had become an icon of resilience, a symbol of strength for so many people who had lost hope. She was now living a life she never imagined possible, surrounded by people who loved and respected her for who she was. Not for who she had been, but even as she flourished, there was something that lingered. The betrayal from Jake still stung, but it no longer had the power to control her. She had learned to forgive, not for him, but for herself. And as the months passed, she started to see that her greatest victory wasn't in her success or independence, but in her ability to move on without him. Jake had underestimated her, and he was paying the price. But now, with the lawsuit hanging over his head, he had no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. As his business world continued to thrive, his personal life was unraveling. His former wife had become an unstoppable force in her own right, and no amount of money, power, or success could fix the damage he had done. He had built an empire, but he had lost the one thing that truly mattered. In his mind, the clock was ticking. He could ignore the lawsuit, fight it in court, and try to salvage his reputation. But something told him that it was already too late. As he sat in his office, staring at the documents in front of him, he realized that he wasn't just facing a legal battle. He was facing the consequences of abandoning the person who had once been his everything, and he knew deep down that no amount of money could ever buy back the love and trust he had so recklessly thrown away. But Emily had one final card to play, and Jake had no idea what it was. And it was this last twist that would leave him questioning everything. As their story neared its climax, the line between redemption and ruin blurred. Would Jake finally find a way to make things right? Or had Emily's transformation into a powerful, self-made woman sealed their fate forever? Jake sat in his office, the weight of the lawsuit hanging over him like a dark cloud. His business empire, once a symbol of his success, felt increasingly hollow. But as he stared at the legal documents Emily had sent him, something shifted inside him. He had spent so much time running away from the truth, from what he had done to her, that he had forgotten the one thing that mattered most: love. And now, it felt too late. Just as he was about to make a decision about how to handle the lawsuit, his phone rang. It was an unexpected call, one that would change everything. The voice on the other end was familiar, yet distant. It was Emily's. Jake's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was hearing things. "I think it's time we meet," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. "There's something you need to hear from me." Jake didn't hesitate. Without even thinking, he agreed to meet her. His mind was racing. Was this the chance for reconciliation he had been hoping for? Or was it just another chance for her to deliver a final blow? Either way, he knew he had to face her. Not just because of the lawsuit, but because he needed to understand the person she had become. When they met, it was nothing like Jake had imagined. Emily was no longer the frail, vulnerable woman he had left behind. she stood before him, confident and poised. A stark contrast to the woman who had once depended on him. She had truly transformed into someone else, someone entirely her own. "I don't need anything from you, Jake," Emily said, her eyes steady and unflinching. "The lawsuit, it's not about money. It's not about revenge. It's about showing you that I've moved on, that I don't need you in my life to be whole." Jake stood frozen, trying to process her words. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, only a quiet strength. She wasn't the person who needed saving anymore. She had saved herself. "But why, Emily?" Jake asked, his voice shaky. "Why file the lawsuit then?" Emily smiled softly, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Because I needed to make sure you understood something, Jake. That what you did to me wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was a choice. And I needed you to see the consequences of that choice. Not just for me, but for you. You can't walk away from people and expect nothing to change." Jake's eyes filled with guilt. He had spent so long telling himself that his decision was for the best, that he was doing what was necessary. But Emily had shown him how wrong he had been. He had abandoned her, and in doing so, he had lost her forever. Not just as his wife, but as a part of his own story. "I'm sorry, Emily," Jake said, his voice breaking. "I never should have walked away." Emily nodded, a slight understanding in her expression. "I know you are, Jake, but you don't get to undo what's been done. I've moved on. I'm stronger than I've ever been, and I've found peace with everything. You have to do the same." There was a long silence between them, as if both of them were weighing the gravity of the moment. For the first time in a long while, Jake realized that he had no control over the situation. Emily had her life back, and there was no place for him in it anymore. The truth was, she had become the person she was always meant to be, and it wasn't because of him. It was in spite of him. Jake left the meeting feeling hollow, but as he returned to his office and looked at the papers once more, he understood something. The lawsuit wasn't just about retribution. It was Emily's way of reclaiming her dignity, of showing him that she didn't need him to survive. She had already done that on her own. The final lesson Jake learned was simple, yet profound. You can't build an empire on the brokenness of those you love. His success had been built on the backs of so many, but the one person he had failed was the one who had been closest to him. Emily's strength had been her own, and in abandoning her, he had robbed himself of something far more valuable than any amount of money or recognition: the opportunity to grow together, to learn from one another. As time passed, Jake tried to mend the fractures in his own life. He focused on rebuilding the relationships he had neglected, and slowly, he found a way to forgive himself. But he knew deep down that nothing would ever truly replace what he had lost. Emily had been his true partner, and now she was free from the man who had failed her, free from the marriage that had been built on selfishness. In the end, Emily's story wasn't just one of survival. It was one of transformation. She had found herself again, not in the arms of a man, but in her own strength. And as for Jake, the story of his downfall and redemption was one he would never forget. The greatest lesson of all was that love is never something to take for granted, and once it's lost, it can never be fully regained. As the months passed, Emily continued to shine, no longer in the shadow of her past, but as a beacon for others who had been through the same kind of pain and betrayal. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a story of resilience, of overcoming the hardest challenges, and of finding a way to thrive no matter what life throws at you. And Jake, he would always remember the lesson Emily had taught him: the cost of abandoning love and the strength of a person who refuses to be broken